Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ahlan wa sahlan. Marhaban. Welcome to another beautiful, wonderful show with the most amazing hosts in the entire universe. We have Hazrat Altaf with us. And we also have some other people with us as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that slice of humble pie.
No, I was just like...
Nav's always been my Z-list celebrity, Mufti Sahib.
So, how's the week been, guys?
Alhamdulillah, man. Busy.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Wa alaikum assalam. Hadiqa, ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome, welcome. MashaAllah. Hadiqa seems to be the first person in all of our live streams. MashaAllah. So, Altaf, I think maybe Hadiqa might get a discount on steaks.
Of course, of course. Our discount is minus 20%. Because it's already discounted and it's a minus, that means there's more.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Oh, by the way, if anyone has bought any of Altaf's steaks, please let us know what they're like. I'm dying to taste it yet, but because in the winter, I can't really eat too much red meat. I'm dying to taste it, inshallah. Once the weather gets a bit better, I'm definitely gonna. Maybe the
I told Nav he'll get his free one. He's on commission at the moment.
No, I want. Otherwise, I want to pay for it so I can taste. I can taste my money as well.
Ah, of course you will, Musab.
I need to taste it, bro.
If you pay for it, you can be a lot more critical as well.
Exactly, that's it. And you know when you're like giving something as a gift.
Were the dumplings you made or Yorkshire puddings, bro? That really
Yorkshire puddings. Yorkshire puddings. This week, beef Wellington. If you want to follow me on Instagram.
What's beef
Wellington? Are you going to do a Christmas meal as well, Altaf?
Yeah, I am actually. I'm not making it on the 25th. I'm making it on the 25th after Maghrib time. So it's the 26th. It's Boxing Day. I got Ali's as well.
Boxing, astaghfirullah, haram, brother. Boxing. Do on the 28th now. Do on the 28th.
I'm telling you, man. Somebody texts me, goes, brother, you can't have this meal on Christmas Day. I said, but I had it after Maghrib. Is that all right?
Yeah, you get away with it, bro. You know the
Are you actually going to do a turkey, Altaf?
So I'm doing a bird in a bed. 3-bed roast.
What does a turkey taste like? I haven't really had a turkey I have a turkey, those strips.
Google it, Nav.
Like, what does it taste like? Turkey roast.
Are you going to do a chicken and a duck and a turkey?
Yep, that's turducken. But because I don't like duck, I'm going to do a bird in a cap-on rooster. So it's going to be a chicken in a rooster in a turkey.
You lost me when you said steak.
It's a 3-bird roast, Mufti Sahib. Is boneless, so when you slice it, you actually get 3 birds and sausage filling around the edges.
Oh, no. By the way,
it'd be my dream to make one.
On Facebook, can you just check someone? If you're live on Muslims, hopefully it should be. So I got my red tea, guys, here. Yeah, this red tea was sent to me by one of our subscribers, Sufyan. Him and his wife sent me this red tea. They go around the world. And they've been collecting teas, so they sent me a sample of the tea collection they've had. So this is some red tea. I don't know where it's from, but okay, mashallah. We have our guest who is going to come on in a bit. Let's just talk a little bit about what today's podcast is going to be about. Altaf, go for it, bro.
Today's podcast is going to be about halal transactions and halal investments. So one of the things that we're finding a lot more about is, as Muslims in this country, they become poor, but there's some that become richer. There are opportunities to invest, and traditionally, we as a community invest a lot in property. But I really wanted to know, like, what are the options? Like, where can you actually invest your money? What kind of return can you expect? What's good? What's bad? And I just wanted to learn a little bit more. So I wanted to learn about it. So I thought to myself, you know what? I might as well get Ibrahim on the show. So Ibrahim who's joining us shortly. I don't know if he's in the background at the moment.
Yeah, he's in the background.
Ibrahim, who's joining us shortly, is from Islamic Finance Guru. Islamic Finance Guru is a a website that provides advice about halal investments. So Ibrahim is an amazing gentleman, mashallah, who is very well accomplished, studied at one of the big universities in tandem with. He's also done his, I believe, he's done Dars in Nizami as well. And then he was practicing as a lawyer, and now he's moved full time into IFG.
What's IFG? Sounds like some sort
Islamic
of
finance guru, man.
Sounds like some sort of a hospital sort of like procedure.
Islamic
IFG,
finance
bro.
guru. It's about halal investments. So for me, it was really important. I wanted to learn a little bit about it. So I thought to myself, you know what? It's something that the audience might want to learn about as well. You know, without going straight into the brother, there's no investment like the investment of the akhirah. You know, one of them ones. And it like before we get there, like, you know, how do we facilitate an even better investment in the akhirah? So yeah, I just wanted to learn more. Musab. I always hear about like invest in property, but you know, it's like sometimes it's not reachable for people to like just invest in property. Is there like, you know, is there a lower entry point? What else can we invest in? What do shares look like? Is it halal? What type of share should we go for? Isn't it gambling if you go for high risk shares? You know, questions like that. And what is it that we're looking for? So I just really wanted to ask about those types of questions. And just see what the halal alternatives actually are.
Give me a second. My battery.
Nav, what have you invested in so far?
Guess what I've got? Guess what this
Apart
is?
from beard oil.
I've invested in this, my
Well,
brothers.
with
The
the
future
mobile
of the
oil.
world depends
Batteries.
upon these. If you don't have these, technology, you don't have technology.
Tesla, man. That's what Tesla's done, and they've just they've gotten really good with their batteries.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna.
That's my right hand, by the way.
And so why, my brother? Why are you drinking with your left hand?
This is my left foot.
Sometimes you come out as an advert in it. Yeah, but that's what I wanted to really have a conversation about with him.
You know,
just to
I've
see-
been telling you, Altaf, for so long. We need to bring on, you know, people who are in this area, so they can give us better insight, inshallah, of you know, this area. Because a lot of people seem to have a lot of doubts regarding the Islamic sort of side of it. Is it really Islamic? And you know, conspiracy theorists, you get a lot of them kind of.
But
So we're
they're
gonna bring
well
on-
placed as well. Some of them Mufti Sahib, because like you get those WhatsApp group, that Facebook group, that Muslim entrepreneurs one, where the guy, what's his name? Khan Mirza. What a name, innit?
Brother,
When the guy's name's that, innit? I think
the only other con I've heard about is Con A. Yeah.
Oh, Astaghfirullah, Tawbah karo Mufti Sahib, watching Khan Air.
And even that was about cons.
Oh, that's true.
All right, so let's bring him on, inshallah. We have our guest. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome, brother Ibrahim.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How's it going?
Alhamdulillah. Ibrahim, how you doing, man?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It's great to be speaking to you again.
I know, mashallah, man. You know the funny story about Ibrahim is I first met him about, don't know, man, 13, 14 years ago.
It was longer.
And it was quite funny because I reminded him of something he shared with me that I think he probably had forgotten about.
Yeah.
Pulled it out of nowhere. It's still in my email inbox, you know.
Really? Oh, so I sent it to you.
Yeah. I asked for a copy.
Allah, and you read it?
Yeah. I
You
thought it was
read
good. I thought you'd have gone out with it.
Really?
Yeah. I read most of it. I didn't even complete it.
Interesting. Well, I think you're a brave man.
Am I one of one readers?
We should probably let Mufti Sahib and Naveed know what we're talking about, unless they already do.
I didn't know whether you wanted to release the details of your. He wrote a novel when he was. How old were you when you wrote the novel?
Well, I think we met when I was about 16, right?
Yep.
So
Whoa.
it must have been around then. So,
Yeah, definitely.
I was writing a book. I mean, I was your typical kind of, well, I said typical. I was, practicing Muslim kid, and I thought I'd write a novel. It's a trilogy called World War III, and it basically ends with World War III essentially. And in the first book, I mean, this was obviously back in the day. So in the first book, I basically got Palestine freed. In the second book, we we kind of started going for like a, Muslim, let's say, quite a strong Muslim presence globally. And then, I mean, this I'm picking my words carefully here. And then I can't actually remember what happened in the third book. I think we ended up in space in the third book. But I think I've mellowed a lot since. The actual book that I'm now working on as a kind of contrast, which inshallah hopefully should get published at some point, is the Diwan of Imam Shafi'i. I was translating that many years ago, and I've been meaning to actually get it published. So inshallah, hopefully that should happen at some point.
Oh, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. So the one of the main reasons, Ibrahim, for bringing you on was I had a question from. Oh, we're getting questions already, man. I had a question myself, right, that I'm struggling with. Is there a lower point of entry when it comes to making investments? Put simply, without having to spend on property like all Asians do.
Yeah.
How do you get a better return for the money that you actually have, and is there easier ways of making money?
I'm more interested in this trilogy.
I think I've got the first book. I don't have the other two.
I'm interested in because I was actually writing a book on a sci-fi book I was writing, which was on. It was called The Muslim on Mars.
Allahu Akbar.
It was about in the future, set in the future, and it's about this guy who kind of is trying to search for meaning to life, and eventually he just comes across this random Muslim guy. It's supposed to be like a dystopia kind of situation. And I was writing it, and then I realized how hard writing a book is. So I just turned the laptop off, and I said, "Bas, it's holiday for me."
One Niqabi sister makes it to the Forbes list, and all of you guys become authors overnight. Subhanallah.
Oh yeah, about her. That's interesting. It's interesting why Muslims haven't been in sci-fi, in sci-fi novels or in sci-fi. Even though if you watch some movies, you'll find the names in the title, Muslim names. You find the credits. And the Muslim name you'll find. They might not be practicing Muslims. I don't know. Wallahu alam. But it's interesting how Muslims haven't really I don't know. What do you think, Ibrahim? What's the?
I think this is it's a massive problem, and I feel like Muslims need to be in lots of different spaces. I mean, finance and investment is obviously one, but one whole other areas like this culture scene. So I think it's really fundamental to the way we think. Human beings learn by past examples. We learn by stories, and we learn that fire hurts because someone at some point has burnt their finger, and we learn from that. And so stories are how our brain gets wired. And the people that actually do the wiring these days are J.K. Rowling, Charles Dickens, Jane Austen, Anthony Horowitz, Michael Morpurgo, etc., etc. And Muslims are sadly nowhere to be seen in this whole wiring, and actually, if you think about it, morality and the way you behave and the way you think and just the thought patterns, all of that stuff, well, not all of it, but a lot of it will come down to just, the culture that you consume. And I think it's a big shame that we don't have as many Muslims in fiction, non-fiction, poetry, art, acting. I think there's a big lack of that. Obviously, there needs to be parameters and how we do it in an Islamic way, but I think it's a deep problem.
Is that like the phenomena we see with something like Ertugrul, and you see like a success that's had across the world, and how it's revived people's spirits? I know that people are walking around with forks and spoons in their pockets now and wooden spoons to dawats at people's houses, but it gives you something to be proud of and something that you can see visually, as opposed to kind of things you read and hear about in an era of lots of videos and stuff, innit?
100%. We know, all of us know about World War One, World War Two, the Holocaust, the Iraq War. We've watched what's it called, Black Hawk Down, the Somali one, which makes them look like absolute legends when they were doing a lot of dodgy business. and yet no one really knows anything about Badr or Uhud or the various different. I mean, I frankly don't even know the various different key historical events, whereas other stuff we know it inside out.
It's because we have it's where we make effort, and I think in certain quarters, like we've just got used to TV. Do you know what I mean? Like we've just about accepted that TV's all right, and we've got like 2 or 3 TV channels, and even then, like, don't look at the screen and poke yourself in the eyes, so it's a bit hazy. Huh?
Is that what you do? Is that what you do?
Poke yourself in the eye so you don't see anybody. Put your fingers in your ears. No, I'm joking.
My nanny, she back in Pakistan, she was really anti-TV. She still is. She doesn't. We have to use voice calls on WhatsApp with her. She doesn't accept video calls, and she got her driver to. She used to have like this dars in Pakistan. So she got the driver to collect up all the different TVs from the area with all the women who used to listen to her dars, and they set fire to all the TVs. And they made this bonfire outside the house, and the police came and they were like, "What are you doing?" And the driver was like, "Yeah, Khalajan told me to burn these TVs."
That's one way of getting rid of it. Rid of all the stuff.
That's another level of halal around police.
So she's a militant minority.
Oh, subhanAllah, man, that just sounds quite impressive. But you did break a record just then, Ibrahim. The record is you mentioned Pakistan and a story about Pakistan before Mufti Saab mentioned the story about Pakistan.
Oh, Akbar. You beat me to it, Ibrahim. Ibrahim, I will now surrender to you the
first
honor.
time in 6 months, Nav.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Yeah, that's an honor, I think.
Yeah. So I think one of the things sorry, Mufti Saab.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the first time I actually read a novel was in madrasa. That was the first time I read a novel. There used to be a guy in madrasa. He was from Kenya. The guy wasn't really that much interested in kind of studying, but he just loved reading novels. Like, he had a passion for. He had in fact, he had one of those old suitcases. Like in those kind of old kind of movies when the guy has his whole life savings and everything in a suitcase. He had opened a suitcase. He goes to me, "Which one do you want?" Yeah, and I go to him, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Novel." So I go, "No, I've never read a novel." He goes, "No, trust me, this one's good." He pulled out like one. He goes, "This one is really good." Like the guy from like his memory, from his hifz, he could like quote to you what each novel's about. So he gave me this novel, and it was like a very interesting one. And I realized, the way that the writing kind of is geared, it keeps you, intrigued of what's going to happen next. You want to flick the page over and see what's happening next. Even when the azan's going off, you're thinking to yourself, "You know what? Let me just read the last page and then I'll stop." Definitely. And when I finished the book, I just closed it, gave it back to him. I said, "You know what? I don't want this book, man. Yeah, this is a book that's wasting my time, really wasting time." But it was interesting. I mean, that was my first experience with reading a novel. And last. First and last.
Like my sister, she went to Darul Uloom, and she was saying that they used to kind of have to smuggle them in because apparently it was a bit like contraband. And then Harry Potter in particular was like, it was sihr, isn't it? So that was game over.
Yeah, that's subhanallah. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, Naveed, what do you think, Nav? Naveed's word, was it poets, bro? Spoken poets.
I don't know what the first novel I read was. I remember I was into Roald Dahl in the early days. I'm sure all of you guys probably remember Roald Dahl. That's as early as I can think back. But yeah, to be honest with you, like I hardly read fiction anymore. Like I can't remember the last fiction book that I've read, to be honest with you.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's not like I don't find them interesting. It's just that I've just never really been into them, to be honest with you. It's like, since the TV was invented, like I can get this as a program. Okay, yeah, let's go. This one, this one, good one.
Alhamdulillah.
What about you? What the last novel you read?
Well, I think you're
the last novel I've read. I haven't read many novels. I've been reading lots of books, but not many that I'd call novels. I think some of the finance books that I've read are novels. they read as such. Probably one called Range. I think that's it's one of those self-help books, but I think it's a novel at the same time. And like things like books like Black Box Thinking, I think they're like novelty types of books. So they talk about a subject area, but they're more kind of written in a narrative that's a story. So I think that I'd count those as those. Sorry, my cat's just come here. I'm just trying to bite my hand. So I think that's what I've probably read. But in terms of like what the main reason, and switching topics, the main reason why Mr. Khan is on here is because I want to learn about investments and return on investments. And I spoke to Mufti Faraz, right? So I had a lengthy conversation with Mufti Faraz. I said, Mufti Saab, I said, I know nothing about investments. I said, I know about zakah a little bit. I said, but I know nothing about investments. And I'm looking at, what people normally invest in, and they're trying to secure their futures and all of this stuff. And the Asian answer is always property, brother. Just invest in property and put it on rental, or the new one, make it into a HMO and put lots of homeless people in there, and then cream the extra support cost. One or the other. And like I was like,
don't provide the support either.
Yeah, don't provide the support. I was like, that's a bit expensive for me. I was like, what are the other options? And then a couple of my younger cousins were like, yeah, we trade in Bitcoin, and a couple of others were like, yeah, we buy and sell shares. They talk about Tesla like they own Tesla. So I was just like, I don't actually know much about it, and I don't know what is permissible and what isn't permissible. And I'm guessing, Ibrahim, that you get this question a lot of the time.
Yeah, we do. So
where do you begin with something like this?
So I think the kind of so we do these like 10-minute drop-in sessions every Friday, because we found that people they like reading the articles, but they sometimes just need to speak to someone. So we essentially just started this community service where we say, look, I'm just going to dedicate 2 hours to speak to people, and in 10 minutes, ask me whatever you want. So I've got used to doing like 10-minute sessions of where I do a whistle-stop tour through someone's finances, and at the end of it, they kind of know what they're doing. So I think the kind of first question to ask is, why are you investing? Like, what's the point of it? I don't actually. I mean, there's a few personal questions that are quite important. I guess we can use like an abstract person in terms of like how much they're looking to invest, how much they're saving in terms of every year, and are they on the housing ladder? So kind of let's assume this person he isn't on the housing ladder. So if he's not on the housing ladder, I would say that the first thing that they should try and do is get on the housing ladder, get a deposit together for an Islamic mortgage or to buy in cash, and get themselves out of the rental cycle. Because we've got a calculator on our website called the "Should I Buy or Should I Rent" calculator, and the finding for 90% of people is that you should be buying rather than renting, because obviously rent you lose that money forever. At least with the mortgage, you're buying, you manage to keep that money in some way, shape, or form. And for people, particularly in London, this adds up to hundreds of thousands of pounds over the course of 20, 30 years. So it's pretty well worth it. So the first thing I say is get out of debt if you're in debt, but then secondly, look to get onto the housing ladder. And then once you're off the housing ladder, then it's a case of, okay, look, now I'm ready to kind of think about investing. And then it's all about your objectives and your timelines. So if you're investing over a very specific short timeline, like, I need to pay for my kid's university degree in 2 years' time. Now that means that you cannot invest in something that is illiquid and is a 5-year timeline, for example. It just doesn't work. So the objectives you have are actually quite important. So tell me, Aldaf, what's your objectives?
So I think I was just thinking to myself, how do you develop a straw man without actually doing it for yourself? So I would say that, okay, that from my experience, the average zakah payment normally an organization takes is 250 quid, which would mean that you're roughly kicking around the 10 grand in savings, right? Which is kind of like that figure that people say, okay, I'm at that level of, I have, say, for instance, as an example, 10 grand that I'm looking to invest in various different places. And the reason why I'm investing is because I look at my pension scheme at work and it's not that great. And I want to do something to secure my future as an alternative to a pension scheme. And so I'm looking at all the options that are available to me. Nothing at this moment in time sounds good to me. And when I hear about like returns of like, I'm going to invest £1,000 and they say they're going to give me like, you know, £100 at the end of the year, I'm like, that's not really a return on investment, you know. So I don't feel comfortable with that, and that doesn't sound exciting to me. So I would say that that's what I would go with. It's like that as an example.
That's really interesting. So I guess there's a few things I'd say. First thing is, typically you find that the best investments are the not exciting ones, and the more exciting ones are often the more high risk, high reward ones, where, you know, it's exciting for a reason, and you know, you have to kind of take the thick with the thin. So in terms of like, okay, so you've got 10 grand. The way I think about it is, okay, so you've got 10 grand and you're maybe saving, I don't know, 2 grand a year over the next 5 years. So over the next 5 years, you're going to have about 20 grand in total to play with. And you've got a long-term time horizon here because you're just kind of saving and supplementing your pension. So let's say you've got 20, 30 years, so plenty of time to do, you know, interesting stuff with it. I think one big important principle is that you diversify your portfolio. So you don't want to go all in on one thing. So that's one important principle. And the other important is to make sure that your risk is adjusted with like what kind of time horizon you're looking at. So you can afford to be a bit riskier when you've got a long-term time horizon, because things can, you know, you can come back over that period of time. Whereas if you've only got 2 to 5 years to play with, it's very difficult to recover from a loss. If you're, you know, so you've got 20 grand and you've got a long-term time horizon, what I would say is there's broadly like 3 buckets that you can put your money into. Number one, stocks and shares, the stock market. And there are 3 different ways that you can invest in the stock market. I'll come back to them. And number 2, you've got property. And we all know about property, and there's a few different ways that you can invest in property too. And then number 3, you've got alternative assets. So this is the exciting stuff that I actually personally really like as well, and it sounds like you do as well. And we'll talk about what kind of stuff is in there. So stocks and shares, there's a reason why they form the bread and butter and bedrock of pretty much all pensions. And the reason is because you know, you're exposed to a wide array of different things that are going on in the economy, in the real world, and that means that you're you know, you're diversifying within a diverse portfolio overall as well. And within stocks and shares, if you are there's 3 ways to invest there. One is you can DIY it. So, you know, your cousins who are investing in Tesla, that's them just DIYing it, and they're like, you know what, I'm just going to invest in Tesla. That is foolhardy, frankly, unless you know what you're doing, because you know, your cousin is probably not someone who dedicates their lives to studying the stock market. And if they are not someone like that, then they're making decisions largely based on conjecture, bad reasoning, hype, you know, looking at some Googling here or there. And sometimes they'll be making the right decisions accidentally. And often they'll be making the wrong decisions. But if it was that easy, then everyone would be making money on the stock market. It's not that easy. And over the long run, the only people who win in the stock market are people who have a method that actually works. But for that method to develop, you need to really invest a lot of time and effort in. For most people, I'd say they don't have the you know, the interest or the appetite to really dedicate to it. Now, I happen to do some stock investing. Like if I did it, I'd actually do a mixture of all these different techniques. But I do some direct stock investing as well. And if I'm not researching properly, like at the moment these days, I just don't have the time to research properly. If I don't, I'm just not going to invest because it's not sensible. So that's the first thing. Get a broker and just invest directly. The second thing is you can invest in a fund. Set up a brokerage account and buy the HSBC, the HSBC Islamic Fund, or the Oasis Crescent. They've got a whole load of funds, and there's lots of Islamic funds out there. And if you go on the website islamicfinanceguru.com/halal investments, you'll find them all kind of compared next to each other to give yourself like a sense of what you want to go for. And then the third way is the really hands-off way, which is just give it to a robo-advisor like Wahid Invest or Simply Ethical, or there's a few others abroad as well these days. And all these guys do is like you log on, you give them, I don't know, £1,000, and then you choose what risk profile you want to go for, and then everything else they'll just kind of do for you. And they will take a fee for that. They'll take about, I think it's 0.5% to 0.8%, which, if you can save that by just setting up a brokerage account and investing in the fund directly yourself, then do that. But sometimes people, they just they don't have that acumen to do that. So that's the third way. And by the way, just I can talk on this for hours. So
the difference between them. So like you said, there's like the robo advisor, the Simply Ethical, and the Wide Invest. Obviously, mashallah, Wide Invest had some crazy marketing taking place in the last 18 months. So if you haven't come across that name, then you haven't been on social media. So the difference you were just saying in terms of like going with the robot advisor, where you give them the money and they just invest it on your behalf, you were saying that you could do, what was the alternative to that?
So what Wahid Invest actually invest in is a bunch of different funds, and maybe like gold ETFs or a little bit of this, that, and the other. And a lot of those things, they're very open about what they invest in. So you can actually just go directly to a broker and just invest in that stuff yourself, and lots of other stuff as well. But what you don't get with this approach is you don't get a readjusted portfolio as things change over time, and you don't get someone essentially looking after your money and keeping an eye on roughly what's going on. And also you need to be a little bit more, not like massively more, but a little bit more technically savvy to go in and find the right fund and invest in the right fund, etc., etc. So those are the kind of three ways that I'd say you can invest in stocks: directly, just DIY individual stocks; by a fund which invests in lots of stocks underlying it; or by a Wahid, which invests in a fund which then invests in stocks.
So I'm going to ask you a proper question.
So can I ask a question? Is there such a thing as there being too less of an investment? So let's say, for example, someone has a small pot of money that they've been saving up. So would you say, like, if a person has a certain threshold in their savings, would you say that's too less to invest, or is there no such thing as a?
That's a really good question. So I'd say two things to that. Firstly, as soon as you have money, you have an investment. That money just happens to be all sat in cash. That's your allocation. So the choice of not making an investment is actually an investment. It's a choice itself. So sometimes people are like, oh, I'm kind of on the edge. I don't want to invest. No, you're actually investing, and your investment is losing money at 2% inflation every year. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say, with a small pot, it's really interesting because like my gut instinct on small pots is if it's like 1 or 2 or 3 grand, like in the big picture, it's not really going to move the needle if you lose it, or like if you make a little bit of profit, no one really cares. But if you make a big profit, if you go from 3 grand to 6 grand or 9 grand, that becomes material. Whereas if you go from 3 grand to 0 grand, like let's say you want to buy a house and you want a deposit of at least 30,000 for a house, going from 3 grand to 30 grand is a big jump. So you attempting to do that, and in that process you might accidentally lose half of it. Qadar Allah, you've lost half of it, but 1,500 is not like 3 grand wasn't moving the needle. 1,500 still isn't moving the needle. Whereas if you go from 3 grand to 9 grand, that is moving the needle. In other words, what I'm saying is that particularly if you're young and if there isn't anything else riding on that money, then you could be a little bit more adventurous with it. And this is what me and Mohsin, my co-founder, did earlier on in our careers and earlier on in our lives, where we had a bit more flexibility, not married, that sort of thing, where you just give it a bit of a go. So we did some DIY stock investing, AIM index, penny shares, that sort of thing, and Mohsin, Mohsin invested his father-in-law's money. I invested my mother-in-law's money, and Mohsin invested, I think it was like $3,000. And I mean, it's high risk, high reward stuff, right? If you're investing your in-laws' money, but I think his
there's a lot more at stake, bro, than just money.
But he's did really well. I think he's like 12 grand plus now on that portfolio. Oh. So obviously it was a high risk, high reward portfolio. It was only like 4 or 5 stocks in there, but it did well. And suddenly 12 grand, you can do a lot of interesting things that you couldn't do with 3 grand. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you've got a small pot, then think about like, if you really need that money as a rainy day fund, then don't go mental with it. But otherwise, have a bit of a go.
And how long do you think that the person should invest it for?
So that question is really a question for the person, because the way I think about investing is you should always invest with a objective to it. So if you're investing to pay for your kids' university fees, for example, and that's going to happen in like 15 years time, then like, okay, that's the timeline that I'm on. Whereas if you don't really have an objective, I often find that it's a little bit unclear as to like why you're investing, and that often means that people just don't invest. Then if there's no kind of motivation thing behind it, people just like, oh well, whatever, I'll just kind of leave it because I don't really have an objective here.
Yeah, I think that, and there was also like, I remember I had a friend once. This was like about 10 years ago or something, and he was telling me invest in this petrol company. So there was a petroleum company. He kept telling me invest in it. Every single day, the guy would be on the news, like checking out the news, like these kind of like strange news that we would never have heard of. He's reading these articles and reading what the forecasters are saying. And I said, don't you get a headache? Don't you get stressed? Like always having to check. He's always on his phone checking, what's the price of it today? Shall I sell it? Shall I? And I mean, to me, it just seemed as though extra stress for my mate.
And that's not the way that you should do it. Even like if you're professional about it, that's not the way you should do it. So that's obviously him DIY stock investing, and like it sounds like the classic kind of things that mean people end up losing money. So the reason why he's checking it so constantly and like he's thinking, should I sell it or not, is because he has no plan when he went in. Whereas if you're a professional, what you do is you say, okay, I'm going into this company at 20 pence, and I think that this company, based on the actual accounts that I've looked at, because I've done my due diligence on this, I think this is possibly going to go up to about 60, 80 pence, and that's the target. Whereas as soon as it drops, if I'm losing more than 30%, then I'm just going to religiously cut it. I don't care if I think it might suddenly bounce back or whatever. I'm just going to cut it. If you have that kind of mentality where you're like, okay, I'm going to let the winners run. There are some stocks that I've just held for years, like 4, 5, 6 years. I just keep on holding them because they're doing well. So I just let that run. And any losses that I make, I just very, very quickly, 20, 30%, I just cut it, because you have that rule. And then you're much more like a machine as opposed to an emotional being when you're investing. And when you're investing with emotions, it's all about fear and greed, right? And if you're letting your emotions drive you, that's not data driven. That's not rational behavior. And if it's not rational behavior, then inevitably you're going to lose out in the long run. Whereas if it's much more methodical, then you're more likely to not make those mistakes.
See, the one thing is that you talk about investments in a completely different way than we're normally used to hearing. So what you normally hear is, okay, I gave you this much money. How much money are you going to give me back?
Yeah.
Right. That really loose. And it is to a name to an extent, it is about that. Not to say that it isn't about that, but it's like that's where people are, or where they're thinking. So they're thinking, if I invest, £2,000 with a with one of these robot ones like a Wide Invest, right? And I saw your article on them. That was really good, mashallah. If I invest in there, like, what kind of money am I going to look to get back at the end of it? Because that's the level some people think. That's the level that some people want to get involved at.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want to know too much more.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. And most people actually are like that. And to those people, I'd say, just don't even overthink it too much. Just like with Islam in many ways, pick someone that you trust, pick a scholar that you trust, and obviously do your reading. You know how to like do salah and stuff, but then after that, just listen to what he says, and if he says do a bit of this, bit of this, bit of this, then just do that and don't worry too much about it. Start small, maybe like a few £100 in a few different things, and that way you'll actually like learn a lot more and you become a lot more confident about that whole area. And honestly, there's nothing better than just getting involved and risking actual money, but only a little bit, for you to just develop that confidence in what you're doing. And I think most of the time it's just that like fear of the unknown that people have. But like, why be fearful? Why not just learn, but with a small amount of money, and then within a year you're up and running.
So what's a small amount of money?
100 quid, 200 quid,
and just doing some penny stocks with that.
So like, so we haven't. I mean, this is just stocks, right? So the other two areas are property, and with property you can DIY it, get yourself a buy to let. You can invest in someone like yielders. So with £100, you can invest in actual rental properties, and then you can invest in a whole range of more development property type stuff, or land, like planning permission type projects, where it's a little bit more illiquid. These are like 2 to 4 year projects, and they do offer decent returns though. They can offer somewhere between the 10 and 20% return per annum, which is decent, but they do often have a minimum buy-in of like £5,000. So you would be kind of wiped out quite quickly if you go for those, especially if you don't have that much kind of a pot saved up. So property is a nice area, and the reason why property is important for us is, like, in a conventional non-Muslim portfolio, they've got stocks and then they've got bonds. So bonds are giving them an interest rate bearing return of like, I don't know, 3 to 5%. It's like a really safe fixed return per year. And as they get closer to retirement, they increase the bonds, they reduce the stocks, and that's how they do it. Whereas Muslims, we don't have any bonds, right? Because they're haram. And the sukuk that we have, the Islamic version, there's actually not that many of them kicking around, and it's quite hard to get hold of them, and they're quite expensive. So in the alternative, like, what else do we have as a fixed income return? We have property mainly, and that's not a bad thing, right? Property is not a bad thing at all. And I think, like, if you think about the allocation between stocks, property, and alternative assets is usually between 10 and 25% of your overall portfolio. Maybe have about 30 to 40% in property, and then 30 to 40% in stocks. And obviously you can like kind of vary it around, but roughly speaking, that's probably a good way of thinking of the spread between all of those three things. And then to answer your question, you could experiment a little bit with investing in a stock directly, maybe experimenting with Wahid with 100 quid, experimenting with yielders with 100 quid, experimenting with a few other things for 100 quid, and quickly you'll get a sense of what's going on.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. And when you talk about alternative assets, the exciting one, like, give us a breakdown of what that actually is.
Yeah, so this is where I actually get interested. So before I get into alternative assets, so for me, the reason why I do Islamic Finance Guru is actually quite important to all this. So obviously I was a corporate lawyer before I packed that in earlier this year and went full-time on IFG. And for me, it's about helping the Muslim community globally because Muslims are a quarter of the world's population, and yet they're 20% poorer than the rest of the world. And we think that there's two ways that you can try and solve that. One is by helping every single Muslim investor just get on top of their finances, like get that 10 grand working for everyone, so that they're getting stronger. And then the other thing is helping Muslim entrepreneurs essentially become the next big things. So like out of the top 100 companies in the world, only one of them is from a Muslim country, and that's Aramco, and that's because of oil, right? And after the top 200 companies is another Muslim company, and that's Sabic, and that's an offshoot of Aramco. So out of 200 companies, we've got 2 Muslim companies, which is, I think, an absolute disgrace. And so the second thing that I really wanted to encourage is helping Muslim entrepreneurs get the funding and the networks and the kind of skills to become the next big things, particularly in the venture capital space. And that's what we do with the Angel Syndicate. So we've got an Angel Syndicate that invests in early stage startups called IFG.VC. And then we've got Islamic Finance Guru, which does all the personal finance and investing related stuff. And they both kind of sit together. And all of this investment stuff, imagine if the Muslim community was back on even keel from an economic perspective. It's very possible. All we need to do is A, make sure all of our money is sorted, but then B, make sure the Muslim companies that we have really kick on and become like the Microsofts and Amazons and Googles and Netflix. Like these guys didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now they run this place, right? And if Muslims up our game and we have the right ingredients to make this biryani, if we have that, we can inshallah do that as well. And so all of this investment stuff that we're talking about, honestly, I obviously don't want anyone to lose their money, and we're very careful about what we put out. But for me, it's about the impact to the Muslim community as a whole. Like if Altaf, you go from 10 grand to 15 grand, that's like it's nice for you, but it's not like it's not a needle mover. But if the Muslim community as a whole went from 100 billion to 150 billion, now that's very, very material. And it all takes all of us to do like our little bit. And then on the entrepreneur side, these guys can really move the needle. Like imagine if Muslims, ran, I don't know, Google or Amazon. Like if there were Muslims behind that, these companies have more assets than many continents put together. It's actually mind-boggling how much power these guys have. So that's a very roundabout way of saying that impact in terms of your investment is super, super important. Like for me, that's why I do what I do, because with money and the way that money runs is actually what runs this place and what controls this place. And I did PPE back at university, right? Philosophy, politics, economics, which is like the politician's degree. And I realized
prime minister's degree, that is.
What's that?
It's generally called a cabinet member or a prime minister's degree, right?
Yeah, it is. So I actually, fun story. I studied at the same college as David Cameron back at university, and one of his old tutors, like my oldest tutor, was one of Cameron's tutors back in the 1980s. So yeah, fun fact. But I realized actually very quickly that politics is probably not the way that you actually have real impact. Economics is the way that you have real impact, because that's that's who makes the big decisions, and so to try and have that like impact in the Muslim community with investment is actually the secret kind of hidden thing that I think we often miss in this whole thing. So that's what that's a very long preface, I guess, to alternative investments, which is all about impact. So I think to give you a sense of the two main kind of alternative investments that you could get involved in, one is IFG.VC or Angel Syndicate or startups, where you're investing in companies and businesses, particularly those with a technology focus, those that have that potential to become really, really big and give you a 20, 30, 50, 100,000x return. If you were an early investor in something like an Uber or Facebook, and there were already investors in those companies, you would have literally made 1,000x return. It's possible, and I know people who've done that. And on the other hand, so you've got venture capital, and we can talk loads about that because I'm sure that you might have questions around there. On the other hand, you've got SME financing, so small, medium-sized enterprises. So these are different kind of businesses where they've got different requirements. So think of it like a pharmacy or like a dentist or those kind of like solid businesses, but that aren't going to suddenly become overnight going to become like a juggernaut. And that's fine. It's just a different kind of business. They often need debt financing. So like they need a loan that you get a fixed return from. And of course, there's lots of haram loans out there. But now you have companies, people like Gordos and others, who are providing halal Sharia compliant financing. And Mufti Faraz works with a lot of these companies. And the benefit there that you get is you get like, I don't know, like a 10, 12, 13% return per annum, lending out in a halal way to like a pharmacy, for example, or a dentist, or whatever it might be. And that allows that company to grow and flourish because it doesn't have any other source of halal financing. And like obviously the Isa brothers and EG Group and Euro Marriages and how they did so well was all because of financing.
TDR Capital.
What's that, sorry?
TDR Capital, right?
Yeah, exactly. So TDR is a private equity firm. Now, if you do SME financing on a big level, that's basically private equity. And if you do angel investing on a big level, that's basically venture capital funds.
Okay. So basically, like put simply, it's Dragon's Den, right? But like a virtual version, like where you're asking lots of questions, seeking out where you want to invest your money. Obviously they don't need your help. They're not going to gain anything from your help, and they're not really pitching for it. You're looking for the investments. It's similar to that. I want to commend you for one thing, because I think one of the things I've noticed on your website is that you tell everybody how you're doing it, so that they could do it themselves. Like you even got the links up there. So like when you say go look at startup networks, like you got the link for the startup networks on your website.
Yeah.
Which I think is a very interesting way, because normally when you go to finance people, they tend to hold their cards very close to their chest in terms of like what they will tell you, and so that's why one of the things about IFG that stands out. But anyway, coming back to the thing about investing in startups,
can I just say one thing? I think a lot of the terminology and everything is it's going past my head here. A lot of the acronyms and the. So what I'm saying is there some sort of like an easier way to explain it to people of how, number one, how important it is for Muslims? Like you were giving a short synopsis of how Muslims in today's times you actually given up your law practice to be able to actually invest more time in this because you're seeing the benefit for the larger community. And I've had lots of people who ask me the question, the famous question of mortgages are haram, shall I go into rent? But then the question is obviously the rent is not really long term, it's not feasible for them, because I've seen guys whose marriages are broken up simply because they've lived with their in-laws, right? They've tried to get rental income. They've gone into rental income. They've tried it for about 5 or 6 years. They've been left with nothing at the end of it. And they've had to return back to the house, in-laws' house. And then that's kind of caused friction between them. Some of them have divorced. And so it's like, that's one of the things that it's on my mind. I don't know. And maybe other people who are watching this as well also have the same sort of set of sentiments as well. The other thing is a lot of people have this kind of question. They automatically assume, put your brakes on, investments are all haram, illa mashallah. Yeah, it's like, except for that one drop in the ocean, everyone's investments are haram, so no point even talking about investments. And then when I was like working with the National Zakat Foundation and calculating zakat, it was like I was just surprised how many people have invested. Like, because I kind of assumed that not many people are investing. But then when I found out that there's people investing in stocks and people investing in, whether it's halal or haram, that's a separate issue. But I think a lot of Muslims out there simply just need education on what is going on in the world and what their options are. So I think that's another. I'm just like kind of just saying what's on my mind at the moment.
I think an easy way to look at it, Mufti Sab, is if you ask the brother, what would you recommend as like, you know, a stepping stone to understanding Islamic finance in general, bro? Other than your own website, where did you start off before you created what you created? What are the avenues that you went down to understand the field that you're in, bro?
Yeah, good question. What did I do? So to be honest, when I started off, I kind of twigged on something, which I think maybe my mom like told me, or someone, I can't remember who told me, but it was that in Islamic finance, you're trying to combine modern day finance and traditional, Islamic law, like fiqh. You need to understand muamalat really well, but also just fiqh generally, and you need to understand the nusus, where that comes from, and you need to combine both of those things together, but then not just the combination of the academic from both sides, but then a combination of the practical from both sides as well. And so my kind of career, I don't know if it was like, it's like semi intentional, but so I did a master's in Islamic finance. I did my Alami. I mean, I finished that, but I'm still studying in various other things because I think it's important. And then the corporate law was a practical element, and then the degree was in economics as well. So it's a combination of lots of things, and you find that the best Islamic finance scholars have that as well. So that people like Mufti Faraz has that combination of conventional degrees, but also academic, traditional studies as well. But then also really practical experience as well is really important. And then you've got people like Sheikh Nizam Ya'qubi and others. So in other words, what I'm saying is, if you're like really, really serious, then you kind of need to have both the conventional experience and also the Islamic experience. Now, if you're like not as serious, which I understandably, not everyone is going to be Sheikh Nizam Ya'qubi, right? That's fine. So I think the next best stepping stone, there's a great book called The First Ethical did the book. I think it's called like An Introduction to Islamic.
Sorry to interrupt you, bro. Sorry to interrupt you. First Ethical and Simply Ethical, are they two separate entities? It's been a while, bro.
Two separate entities.
Just making sure.
Yeah. I think it's called Islamic Finance, What It Is and What It Could Be. Yeah, I think that's the book. Islamic Finance, What It Is and What It Could Be by First Ethical. It's a great introduction. And we're actually running, I mean, if people are serious, me and, Mufti Faraz is running this course where he's going through the Majalla, which is an Islamic finance codex. Essentially, it's like a Hanafi text that the Ottoman Empire came up with as a kind of rule book to govern all muamalat in the Ottoman Empire. And that's then the basis for all of the modern Islamic finance standards that currently exist. So what we're doing at the moment, Mufti Faraz, every Friday, we've got a course going on where we just study that systematically over the next 2 years with him. And we get lots of experts, people like, heads of corporate law at law firms, or people with an experience in, from Islamic Development Bank, people who've, Sheikh Suhail Hanif, who's done a thesis in Hanafi fiqh, and various other kind of practitioners and academics who come in and do guest lectures. So at the end of the 2 years, these students who are also doing like practical courses and coming up with real life fintechs as a kind of case studies, but also these kind of lectures. So at the end of the 2 years, they come out like really well grounded in Islamic finance. And I actually, funnily enough, I essentially created this course for myself. I was like, Mufti Sahib, I'd really like to study the Majalla. And then one thing led to another. And then we were like, well, why don't we just let everyone else in on this and let them all study, because the more the merrier, right? So that's kind of, I guess, another way that you can approach it, because there's loads of courses. I mean, this is just one. There's loads of other Islamic finance courses out there that you can learn about.
Bro, would I be correct in saying that, when it comes to Islamic finance, Malaysia plays a key role? The only reason that's come to mind, I remember while I was at NZF, and I remember, I think it was Umar Suleiman, one of the Sheikh Haytham students, and I think Mufti Faraz himself, they traveled out to Malaysia, and they were quite there were quite a few conferences that took place regularly over there, and I think out of all the Muslim majority countries, they took it a bit more seriously than the rest of them. Would I be correct in saying that? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. So the big powerhouses are the Middle East, obviously Gulf, and Malaysia. And I mean, interestingly, the Malaysian schools, the Malaysian school of thought is a little bit more liberal than the GCC school of thought. And I mean, some people would say the GCC is quite liberal as well. But you've got you've got those big two powerhouses that are driving Islamic finance today. And I think that everyone like kind of gets on with each other. But yeah, Malaysia is definitely very, very significant.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Forgive me, guys. I'm on my phone. Yeah, that's why there's a lot of.
What's GCC?
Good question. Gulf Cooperation Council or something. Like basically, you know, all those guys, the Saudis, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman. That's a GCC. What does it stand for? Gulf Cooperation Council. Yeah.
It stands for faster queues when you go for Umrah. That's the one that they all go in while we're waiting for 5 hours.
I was going to say something else, but it's a little too controversial, so I'm just going to leave it.
Shoot from the hip now. When have you ever stopped?
Anyway, so I'm not at that level to be talking about such senior ulama and stuff that they're doing. But anyway,
humbleness, bro, humble. This is the humbleness levels. First of all, it starts at the top over here in this screen, then it moves to this screen over there. Or which side are you on? This side. This side.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Okay, so I've got a question here. So I'm become very interested now in this what you've been talking about, Ibrahim, because like I said, I mean, to me, Islamic. I've got an uncle who's actually in London, and he's a broker. He's actually a financial advisor. He kind of works in the haram industry as well and halal industry. So he's not really kind of too well acquainted with the Islamic side of it. And he does ask me questions now and again about what does Islam say about this type of investment and this. So I generally give him the guidelines, but because, like you said, you need to know the traditional understanding of Islamic finance for buyu muamalat, and at the same time you need to know the modern sort of secular setup that you have in the world. And I think a lot of people don't seem to understand, because what tends to happen is they'll go to a Maulana, average Maulana, and they'll say to him, is cryptocurrency halal? And Maulana will not know what cryptocurrency is, and then, generally they might just say it's best to stay away from it, it's best to stay away from it. So giving the kind of ihtiyat, cautiousness in everything, I think that's one of the problems a lot of people have, waswasa, people have the doubts. The second one is that there's this premise that people have, or this understanding, which is you cannot have an Islamic finance that's trying to work within an interest-based system. Yeah, so it's like every investment you're going to make, it's always going to be like a small, influence of interest, or some gharar or something like that. It is always going to be there. I think that's another thing. So if you can clarify to us to what degree, when we say like you just mentioned about the Malaysians and they're having difference of opinions, to what degree would you say, if I was doing your taqleed and following you, so how would you kind of explain to me that the kind of investments that you guys are making are investments which are Islamically acceptable? So you've mentioned some names of well-known scholars who are backing, these kind of organizations.
Yeah. So, I mean, the very first thing to say is that the only thing that we actually do ourselves is IFG.vc, which is the NGO syndicate. What we actually do, we're like an Islamic finance comparison website. So we just point you to other people, right? And you kind of crack on and do stuff with them. So in terms of, us managing your money, we don't really do that. The other thing to say, I mean, you're very right in terms of the cautious approach that some people might take if you ask them a question that you're slightly unsure about, and that we all do that. If someone asks me a question that I'm not really sure about, I'll be like, look, I don't know, but sounds a bit dodgy. So I mean, cryptocurrency, it sounds dodgy, doesn't it? Look, it just sounds like it's got the word crypt in it, like that. That just doesn't seem right. And obviously that's very problematic. We've actually got, and you should obviously ask any, there's lots of scholars out there, alhamdulillah, who now really know what they're talking about. But even even in non-financial spheres like medical spheres and technical software related kind of questions, if you don't read that area, it's very hard to give an actual fatwa on it. And I think it's important that we, in this modern world where there's a lot of like really specialized stuff going on, that muftis in a way kind of specialize in different areas, because I don't think it's fair on
Mufti Saab, wah, Mufti Saab, especially.
Allah Akbar.
Allah.
Altaf, Mufti Altaf.
Allah.
Steaks.
Mufti al steak.
Only on the third Thursday of every month, not the second or the first one, just the third.
Carry on, bro. Sorry, you'll get this with us. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. It's important because otherwise I just like end up boring people. So the other question was really interesting one about the Islamic system within a non-Islamic system, and I think that is the crux of the difference between the, let's say, Islamic mortgage debate, right, where you've got people who say it's not halal, it's basically just conventional finance, and you've got people who say no, it is halal and it's what we should do, like it's the Islamic thing to do. If you are going to go over a mortgage, you should do that. And the crux of the debate is that this Islamic system that we're trying to create sits within a conventional system, and it's like trying to run. So the pipework is all set up for a conventional bank. The regulation is all set up for a conventional bank. The laws are all set up for a conventional bank. The people are trained up in industries and business schools, whatever, for conventional finance. And then you get this Islamic bank that comes along and tries to, somehow Islamicize or trying to like fit Islam into this conventional system, where even the money that we use is just popped into existence by the issuance of debt. So the very act of giving out a conventional mortgage is the very thing that creates the money supply that we have today. Now, if that's the case, then someone with just cash in their bank account is in many ways is directly contributing to the haram economy, right? That's the kind of level of integration into this haram system that we have. Now, in that context, an Islamic bank comes along, it's just inevitable that what they do is not going to be, 100% Islamic. As it's just not possible. And when it's not possible, when you've got those gray areas, that's where you've got people who just in this line of gray, you've got people who stop here, and then you've got people who stop here, and that's where the difference is.
I remember watching quite a while back. I think it was about the Islamic mortgage itself. I think I was surprised at both ends of the spectrum. Like the argument was so different. I can't remember. I think the brother's name was, what was his son's name? Sheikh Badr. Is that his name?
Sheikh Badr al-Hassan.
Yes, that's the one. And it was Sheikh Haytham. And I remember they didn't really agree on the point, but they both made such a strong argument. I was like, subhanAllah, you don't know where you fall in. So
what was the argument?
Pardon?
What was the argument?
It was about, well, it's been a while back. It's about if there is such a thing, like the brother was saying, basically, if there is such a thing as a halal mortgage.
Okay.
Shall I tell you who I think it was an event.
It's about insurance as well. Yeah. Sorry about
Sheikh Nizam Yaqubi is he from Qatar?
I don't know.
Bahrain.
I think it's Kuwait.
Yeah. Sheikh Nizami Yaqubi, the finance specialist in the Middle East. When he came over and he was talking about Islamic mortgages, and his convincer was so good, man. He's questioned back at the audience. So he goes, the benchmark is obviously the interest rate. So he goes, show me another one, and that's the one I'll advocate for. And it just like everybody in the room just went quiet. It's just like somebody asked me, well, but he's pegged off interest, because the Islamic mortgages are calculated off the benchmark of the interest rate. So he was like, I'm more than happy to advocate the one that you create. And he was like, because you don't have a benchmark that's good enough and has enough of a solid basis. He goes, then we're just gonna go with we go with this one until you write a new one.
Really, really good. Fortunate were the brothers that quickly got HSBC Amana while they were still around.
Yeah.
I thought
one.
you one of them people, yeah.
Last one, man. One of the one got through the gate.
I missed the boat.
because Islamic finance became so expensive that it became the joke in it. They used to say you either hold your ear like this or you do Islamic finance and you hold your ear like this. You're holding your ear, whichever way around you do it. I like that analogy. That one worked quite well, but they made it inaccessible.
Yeah.
And because they made
totally honest, bro.
it wasn't really it was like you go to a scholar and you go to him, is a mortgage permissible? And they were like, no, there's Islamic mortgage. And you're like, yeah, but you need like 95% deposit. They're only gonna borrow me 5%.
And that's why people are more inclined to follow the opinion where, obviously there's a lot of scholars that say that you can have one mortgage as long as you're living there, etc. So people will follow that opinion as opposed to going down the Islamic mortgage when it works out that expensive. And I've heard it many a times, and I'm sure you have as well, Altaf. Like some people, I don't know if they look into it properly, but they'll just argue and say, "Oh, bro, all it is a difference in the wording, but it's still interest, and they're adamant that it's still interest." And said, "No, because the common argument I used to come across against the Islamic mortgage, I won't name the bank. Everybody probably knows who I'm talking about anyway. Is that they don't share the liability at the end. So if I bought the property alongside them, if something was to happen to the property, then I'm the one that's held accountable. I'm the one that's going to go through the financial loss, and they're not going to take it. Then they draw up this old contract from, I don't know from what century, saying that no, this is impermissible, that's impermissible. Allahu Alim, bro. People.
That's what I was telling about Islamic finance when I went to like one of those events, and I got put straight off because they weren't sharing the risk. So they said something along the lines of, "We'll invest the money for you and guarantee you a return. And if the investment that we make on your behalf makes a loss, basically we'll give you money from our reserves to make up for the loss that we made on your money, so we can still guarantee your return." And I just like, one of those things where you just don't get it. You just like, you look at the guy and you're like, yeah, I don't think I will. And when they said it was 3%, you're like, yeah, I'm better off just buying Smarties for myself. So I was looking at a couple of those events. When you look at those kind of things,
it's interesting
kind of get put off.
When I was in Pakistan, said it.
Hey! It only took 1 hour and 18 minutes.
If anyone needs any batteries, I've also got a large supply of batteries. If anyone is in need before the day expires. So when I was in Pakistan, I think there was 2 things that I remember clearly. When I was doing my iftar, I had to write a dissertation, and the main dissertation I had to do was on Islamic banking. So I had to do a little bit of reading into the history and all that. So one of the things that I think Mufti Taqi Usmani also highlights is that this isn't the perfect system. It's never going to be the perfect system that we have. And he says the only way that we can reach this, and the only way that we can help the big, these big investors and money makers in Pakistan at that time, he says, is either we tell them shut all your businesses and tawakkul in Allah, which is not going to be productive for anyone, or the other option is we slowly start to create this sort of scaffolding system where we're slowly tweaking one thing, another thing. Eventually, when we get it right, then everything that we've done in the past can be justified. So what was happening was in Pakistan was there were lots of scholars who were criticizing Mufti Taqi Usmani, because when I was there, they actually wrote a book against him. And what they were, when you read through that book, it was like, it sounded very strange, because they were kind of like, they were making everything black and white. So when you use the argument that people were saying Islamic mortgage and a conventional mortgage are exactly the same thing, you're just holding the ear from the different side. Fatwa doesn't work like that. So what tends to happen sometimes in a fatwa, it can be so nuanced and so layered that sometimes the mufti is looking at something which you can't understand unless you've done several courses on something, and then you understand, oh, that's what he's looking at, and there is scope for that, to take that opinion. And Mufti Taqi Usmani, he's very well known for this. He will take an opinion out of the Hanafi madhab, and he will take an opinion which is from the other madhabs, and he will say, look, the thing is, Islamic finance is not something which you can restrict to one madhab, because the nature of how business and trade works globally, we're living in a global market now. It's not like in the olden days your town or your village or your city was was the place where investments were made. And he says, like, there's very, like, serious questions that we need to raise in today's times, where if you're buying something from abroad, and clearly the Hanafi madhab is saying that you can't sell something which you haven't taken possession of yourself. That position is too problematic in a lot of transactions. So you're either going to say to everyone, all your transactions are haram, and therefore any money that's incurred through that is also like this, and anyone who's working those businesses is also supporting. So either you're going to become haram police, and there's only a few of you in the world who are on the truth, or you're just going to you're going to have to try and come out with a system to work around this. So he was like, when I was there, he was like voice of reason at that time. It was like he was making sense what he was saying, because I was brought up, in the UK, and I understood the way that you gotta live in the world. It's not an easy thing, but because a lot of people over there, they were so used to this idea that Islam got the solution to everything. Their understanding is Islam's got the perfect solution to any problem in your life. It's like it's got this kind of on space stations when they have those what they're called, when there's a fire or something, and they have to get into them pods, escape pods. Yeah, Islam's got an escape pod for everything, and that's not how it works. It's like sometimes you've got to kind of bite the bullet and say, well, look, we can't get out of this. And the Fuqaha have clearly said, when it comes to things like taking an interest on loan, some of the Hanafis have said if it's out of necessity, then you can take it. Now, what is necessity in our times? That's what Brother Ibrahim was alluding towards early on. And I like that point that he said. He said that, just like you have mufti that you rely upon, you need to rely upon someone in this field who's worked in this field for so long. You just got to put your trust in them. End of the day, put your trust in them and just work that way. And inshallah, Allah will not hold you responsible. Yeah, because, you've kind of fulfilled that sort of responsibility.
Would I be correct if I... Sorry, Aldaf. Would I be correct if I said that in general, there's more material and content available within the Hanafi madhab in regards to Islamic finance as opposed to the other three madhab?
I don't know. Ibrahim would know better, I think.
I think so, yeah. I think it's mainly because the Hanafi madhab has, there's been a lot more rulership, right, according to the Hanafi madhab. So there's been a lot more practical fiqh done based on that. I think the Ottoman Empire, and Mufti Sahib can maybe correct me, I think the Ottoman Empire was all Hanafi. I think there was a bunch of other states that were all Hanafi. So there's a lot of case law, so to speak, based on Hanafi fiqh.
I have a question. There's one type of finance that really appeals to me, but I've never been able to find anything like this. So I'm interested in microfinance. Particularly those people that are vulnerable within our communities, and looking at how we provide microfinance to them, but in a way that's profitable, so that you provide them with a loan, you have shared equity, they buy a percentage back of the equity, and then you remain with 10-20% of the business, but they continue their business and they carry on, and then you invest in another business. And that type of model really appeals to me, but I've just never come across anything like that. Obviously, it takes place abroad, but in that kind of
give us an example
from that Islamic point.
What's an example?
Sorry, Musab?
What's an example that you've come across?
So Grameen Finance in Bangladesh, that has some kind of take on that. It's based on the system of, well, they reckon they're based on the system of Abdurrahman ibn Auf and the example from that time. But I think it probably has developed, and he won a Nobel Prize for it as well in terms of the way that microfinance worked. I think his name was Abdul Kalam. I can't remember his exact name from the top of my head. But I've always looked for something like that in the UK, because when you've worked with people in poverty for 15 years, Mufsab, and you've seen them in that situation, and all they need is that help, that little bit of assistance, and you're not able to give that as charity, but I think you'd be more willing to give it as an investment. So I'll give you an example. So I came across a sister who was from Syria, who was a widow. She was working in the UK. She was trying to get out of her situation. Her skills were around becoming a hairdresser. And at that time, you could see that actually, you'd give it, she'd taken on charity and stuff like that. But she had this thing, people have this thing as well, not just her, but other people as well, have this thing about dignity as well. And they don't just want to hand out, they want to be able to work as well. And so if somebody at that stage had been able to invest, say, couple of grand, 3-4 grand, and been able to set that person up in that particular profession, they would have made a good return on it, right? Or over years, over a couple of years. But at the same time, they would actually help somebody out of that situation and that predicament. And I think that's where it becomes really direct with that person, that that where you're moving the needle. You're not moving the needle for the ummah, right? But if there's enough of us moving the needle at that localized level, you're actually transforming and changing lives and creating opportunities, which will ultimately have that butterfly effect when it comes, over generations, because you're giving them that help at that moment of crisis. So whether you use zakah or something like that is a different question. But I'm just thinking of from an investment perspective, and I've not come across anything like that in the UK. So I really like the idea of angel investment. But I think the definition of an angel investment probably is more apt for something like that, where you can, create opportunities at a time when they don't exist for a person, or help them with opportunities. Obviously, Allah creates the opportunities, but you know what I mean.
Ibrahim. So like for example, situation with masjids and madrasas, in the UK, for instance, where they're predominantly supported by handouts, it's just charity chandas that are done. And because of COVID, now we've seen the big hit it's had on masjids, where the Friday fund that they would normally get, it's just like it hasn't come in for the past few months, and now it's impacted on the masjid. I've heard of teachers being laid off. You've got imams that have been told to just not take a wage. So I mean, to me, it seems that the system is broke. As in, they relied on this system for so long because it was imported from, India subcontinent, and it kind of worked for a very long time because they never imagined that something on such a large scale would ever occur. And now you got these new kind of things coming out, these kind of launch good projects where people are. So I guess that's a new kind of investment. From your understanding, what would be like for the future of the masajid and these madaris? What would be the best way to invest in these?
It's a really good question. Where do I start with this? So, let's kind of frame it with where do we want to get to? So, the Church of England has this endowment of £8 billion.
Whoa.
And every year, they just will put it into safe property and whatever, and just make 5% on it, let's say. And that's a cool £400 million that they can do whatever they like with. And the Bijare, their churches, it's shutting down left, right, and center. So they have less and less to spend it on, and they've got more and more of this money. And obviously the opposite is the case with our masajid. And I think there's a few kind of key threads here. One is that obviously, we know that a lot of Muslims in the UK, they give a lot to abroad, and that's not a bad thing. But I think that it's likely that we're giving too much to abroad and not enough locally, especially for developing long-term institutions in the UK. So that's one big thing. And then I think the other big thing is that we don't give to awqaf. We don't give to things that are intangible. I think we're very selfish in our giving. We give it so that it makes us feel good. We don't care about the impact of it. It just needs to make us feel good. And if that is the barometer by which we give, then always the person, the charity that will succeed is the one that creates the most emotional appeal. But that's not, it's not necessarily the rational or best place to give. So that's kind of, the other aspect in that we don't necessarily give to a standing fund, which can then invest that money and then also distribute out to strategic places as it sees fit, according to some research that it does. And there are now a few awqaf projects out there. I think the National Waqf Fund, the one E-Trust, I want to call it. So Umar Suleiman is National Waqf Fund, and Sultan, the ex-CEO of Al-Rayan, and a few others are involved with the one E-Trust, I think it's called. So that's one other trend. And then the final thing is that I think masajid are, this is all me kind of talking pie in the sky. This is what should be the case. But now, how can masajid actually address the issues? So I think masajid need to be a lot more business-like in their approach and really understand that they actually have a great asset that they're sat on, and that is eyeballs and community. And businesses would kill to have that, right? If you've got community allegiances and you've got attention, that's what businesses pay money for, right? For advertising. So when you've got that, there's all sorts of different ways that you can monetize. So, for example, courses, online courses, bring the madrasa online, events, hiring out the venue, changing the donation model to some kind of subscription fee model where the person who's subscribing to the masjid actually gets some additional perks as a result of that. I mean, I'll probably not go as far as like reserving spots on the front row or something like that, which I'm sure people have a lot of money for.
Shout out to the member. Yeah.
You get that at the moment.
For that.
Sorry,
shout outs.
the front soft one's already gone.
Is it?
That's already in plan. You gotta have keys in it. It's like when you go to the front soft, it's like you hear the ching 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 of everybody's keys drop down.
So, but there's a ton of different things that can be done, I think, with a masjid. Well, like, look, there's the masjid is a location, right? And you've got all sorts of people who are paying rent for locations. So let's say you've got a teacher who teaches maths or even hifz, right? And the masjid says, look, we're going to say that you're accredited by us, and there's just 3 or 4 of you who are on this board, and we allow you free access to the masjid, but in return you just give us 30% of whatever you earn. And that's like the Apple, that's the iStore, what's it called, the Apple App Store, and the Android approach is similar to that, where they just take 30% of whatever you do. And the masjid could do all sorts of things with its resources. And the donation model, rather than giving chanda, it should obviously be a touch kind of model. You can use SMS because that just increases the returns that you can make, because everyone has a phone. Not everyone will have cash these days, so you just tweak a little bit. And then the other way that you can, I mean, I'm talking probably to the converted here anyway, because you guys have charity backgrounds, but get like 5-10 people with an iPad and get the direct debits going, because that person probably, many people won't come back to that masjid regularly, but the direct debit will keep on coming back. So, if you can set those up, then, happy days. So I think there's so many kind of like just existing things that can be just tweaked, that a masjid, without even having musallis in the prayer hall regularly, can actually do very well. Is my sense anyway. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I agree, bro, with everything that you said.
That sounds something. I think some massages are actually starting to look into those kind of areas. I mean, I know some massages where they are hiring out certain rooms and halls for tuition, and some of them are even like starting these subscription online. But I don't think there's anyone that's got any perks. I don't think they're going to be giving perks to anyone. But yeah, definitely, I think I totally agree what you were saying in the beginning, where Muslims in the community need to invest in, for the long term. And I mean, I personally have seen that the best long term investments from like my grandfather's time, and it has been in property, right? I mean, that's because that's how I've grown up. I haven't really become accustomed to other types of investments. But it's like, if Muslims don't own their own properties in the beginning, like you said in the beginning, if you're still living on rent and you're not really kind of buying your own property, it's like you've got this whole nation of people who all of a sudden can just be evicted from their homes, and then you got children with them, and you got all these kind of things. So I think maybe, I mean, this is only me just speaking aloud. I think there needs to be, because one of the biggest problems is just people are just not coming together under one umbrella, right? Everyone wants to do their own thing, and they want to go to their own scholars. And then the problem there is obviously not everyone's scholars are equipped to be able to handle these kind of situations. So I think there needs to be like maybe some sort of like a movement, slow movement that starts where there is this sort of like addressing of mortgaging in this society, right? Whether it's the permissibility of interest-based mortgages and who out there is eligible to actually take it from an Islamic point of view. And the other issue is with what you're talking about, the investments. So you guys provide like a money supermarket for halal investments. And I think there needs to be more exposure. People who are investing at the moment, maybe they need to come out and tell us, right, I'm investing in this. You can also invest in this as well. So I don't know. I mean, that's just me speaking aloud.
For sure. People should check it. So we were trying to do that a little bit with the forum. So we've got forum.islamicfinanceguru.com, where we've got Mufti Faraz and Mufti Bilal answering questions and just people sharing their investment stories. So it's,
Allah.
That's like a bad memory, that is, man.
The legend.
Mufti Bilal, man. What a name.
I love that guy, man. I love that guy, man.
He texts me every other day. He'll say to me, Altaf, I know you're sending me some meat. I kind of
Is Mufti Bilal in Blackburn now? Has he left London?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I think he's in Blackburn now. Yeah.
He might be coming closer to home, Nav.
Allah.
If that happens, I don't know what's going to happen in my life.
With the career change, because I know a lot of people that have left like the corporate sector and joined quote unquote the Muslim sector and somewhat regretted it in some senses as well. How are you finding it? Like, is it challenging, bro? Or going from somewhere which was very professional and where you knew you've got a fixed income coming, etc., and then taking a leap of faith, if you will, now. How's that transition been for yourself?
Really good question. So I actually did a video on this, I think was it last week, where I talked about how I made my shift from corporate to doing your own thing and how to kind of ease that process. Honestly, I have like zero regrets. Like for me, it's I'm 29, so just at the point where things get like you've got past the training stage and things are getting quite interesting. That's the point where I've jumped, and the reason why is because we only have one life, right? And you don't want to give that precious 30 to 50 year period where you're now properly firing on all cylinders, essentially serving faceless institutions, doing what can only be described as marginally useful stuff. Whereas here you've got the chance of creating something that has a real impact in the world, and it's inshallah it's a lasting impact. And what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that you completely fail, and yet you're still a lawyer. You can always go back. And I actually feel that more and more people with privileged backgrounds, frankly, like myself, where my wife is working, so there's all these safety nets that you have, and more and more people in that situation should take the plunge and do their own thing. It doesn't have to be in the Muslim space. Like not everything needs to be Islam related, but I think taking that plunge is not a bad thing. In terms of like how I feel about the Muslim space generally, in terms of like the lack of professionalism, etc. Honestly, I think of it as it's like yeah, that's a given, right? That's a given that if you've got a community that is overall, half of it lives in the 10% poorest areas in the UK, generally not necessarily as middle class, as well educated as other areas of society. It's a given that that's going to be a case. I see it as like this is obviously now slightly grandiose, but think of it like a shepherd who just has a lot of raham for who you're dealing with, and you need to have that, I think, attitude in order to cajole the community that you're trying to help in the right direction. And you appreciate that they may not get it, they may not understand what you're saying, and you might get some kickback of kind of people upset with you on various points. That's perfectly fine, as long as you kind of pointing them and cajoling them roughly in the right direction, then I think that's a job well done. I think that you shouldn't be too sensitive about this stuff. I don't know. Like I've not, like, to be honest, I've not really thought too deeply about it, but maybe I've not been in it long enough to be jaded yet. So who knows?
Altaf, do you see yourself as a shepherd? Or do you lead the sheep straight into the slaughterhouse and turn them into steaks? How is it for you, brother?
I don't sell sheep steak. Just
What-
cows, my brother. Just cows.
What's your connection to meat? I want to understand this.
I've been I'm as a side hustle. Something I really enjoy is I enjoy cooking quite a bit. So what I've started now is my own, along with a friend, a business called Just Sia. And so what we do is we provide high quality premium steaks that have already been cooked sous vide, and basically you get them and you're able to sear them at home within 2 minutes, put them on a plate and enjoy restaurant quality, or even better than, well, not restaurant quality in Birmingham, but restaurant quality anywhere else in the world, steaks at home. We won't talk about pigeon meat and places in Birmingham that provide that.
Nice.
But yeah, so I sell premium steaks that are imported from the United States.
You know, so I mean, I don't know too much about the meat industry, but my brother-in-law, you might know him, Khalid Surti. He's Dr. Ibrahim Surti's son, and
Okay.
they do like halal and tayyib free-range, I think organic free-range chickens. Yeah, exactly.
Is there business the halal and tayyib one?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, mashallah. Corn-fed chicken.
Yeah, like all I know is that they're bigger than normal chicken, and
How much they cost?
oh, it's more expensive. I don't know exactly. I think it's like maybe
between 12 and 15 quid normally, Molana, for Mufti Sahib, sorry.
For one chicken?
Yeah, for one chicken. But the thing is that, you know, if you actually look at processed chicken and the life of it, I was actually listening to quite a few HMC, HFA and all of these talks. Mullah Yunus Dudwala is amazing. Got to get him on this podcast. Not from a stunning and non-stunning, more about how do you maintain Islamic ethics and how do Islamic ethics change when you look at the commercialization of chicken. So if you're going to sell lots of chicken and everybody wants 4 chuzas for a tenner, you know, how are you going to provide 4 chuzas for a tenner? You know, realistically, and if the Muslim community is quite poor and we eat a high meat level or high concentration of meat, do you do a behavior change thing? How do you actually work this that eventually we end up eating better, and we eat less chicken or less meat but eat better quality? How do you actually even start behavior changes in that arena? Because at the moment, like the chickens, what they don't see was the brother from Dr. Lutfi from Ridwan Lutfi from Willowbrook Farm. He was saying that in certain places a chicken will never see natural light in its entire life.
crazy.
4 chuzas for a tenner. There's a price for it, isn't it?
Bro, that's crazy, man. I remember there was a shop here, like not too far from me. They used to sell 2-piece chicken and chips here for £1.
Whoa.
How's
Send me
that even
location, bro.
possible?
Send me location.
It's like the thighs from a pigeon.
All I'm saying is the rat meat is also white. That's all I'm saying. I'm not alluding to anything.
Is it?
I'm just saying.
How do you
no,
know
I'm
that?
joking. I think it's not. No, I'm just joking. I've seen it fried in other countries, Mufti Sahib, where it's a delicacy.
Yeah, I think maybe that would be a good thing to bring on, like Mullah Yunus to do. I think
just his position on how they commercialize it and stuff. Like everybody would be shocked because everybody just thinks like HMC is like some kind of cult or something on it. But his position is really balanced, mashallah.
Another interesting person would be Rizwan. What's he called? Rizwan Khalid from Euro
Quality Labs.
Very, very interesting guy. So I went to his abattoir and did like a podcast where I went around the entire abattoir and he gave a tour of everything. That was fascinating. I left it.
While you're on the subject of meat, guys, I'm sure I read somewhere in the news that I think they finally approved, I don't know if it's here or it's abroad, lab-grown meat.
Was that Singapore?
I'm not sure where it is. Mufti Sahib, can you give us an on-spot right now? Can we eat
Nav,
it?
is that vegetarian?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So what sauce does it come with? What sauce
Which
does
hand
come
is it
with,
in?
brother?
I thought Mustafa was going to say, he was going like this. I thought he was going to say, is it halal or haram? Which hand is it? You pick.
You know, I think a lot of these kind of things you can explain to the people on the mimbar about the ethics of all these things. But I think because at the moment the trend with regards to fast food eating is just so overpowering, you can't get these guys to change. You're gonna get those one or two guys who are gonna become like woke all of a sudden and not want to eat this kind of stuff. But
After
the
a
majority of people, yeah, you got these big wedding, 400, 500 people attending. You're not gonna get like a 12-pound, 15-pound chicken. Yeah, I mean, I've got a brother-in-law who's a butcher. He tells
Feed them
me
dal, innit? Mufti Sahib. That's what they do in India.
No, he doesn't eat wedding food. He goes to me, don't eat the chicken at all. He goes, because I know where they get it from. They come to me and they ask for the worst type, the cheapest type that's gonna go out of date within a few days. The very bruised one. He goes, that's where they come, and he goes, they cook it so much that all this kind of bad odor and everything disappears from it. So it's like, what do you do in these kind of situations, man? It's very.
Now, why are you spoiling weddings for me?
Okay, delete it. It was all a joke.
Until you've been to a chachi wedding. If you've been to a chachi wedding, you know about chicken. They look like dead dinosaurs on the table, bro.
Just a chunk of bones.
Yeah.
Just a mountain. I think that's really good though. Around the ethics, Rizwan's a really good person to speak to because he kind of tells you practically how it is, like from his perspective. I think Maulana Yunus would be a good person as well. But I'm just like, I like looking at the way that we how do you change behaviors and how do you get to the place that you want to be, or do you just give up?
That's a really good question because in a way it's the same question with investments as well, right? Where I think a ton of Muslims just don't care. They don't care about halal investment and halal money. They just do what they want, and it's the same with as long as it's kind of halal, they don't care too much about like the details. So like
I find it really funny. We had one guy who came to me. He owns a HMO, right? So a couple of these guys own HMOs. And I know what they're doing in the HMOs because I know they're like the way they operate, some of these guys anyway. So what they do is that they get a house, they split up the rooms. Each room is given to somebody who's got is currently on a housing benefit or has a support need, so that they can get an extra money. So that and what they're supposed to do is not only provide them accommodation, but they also provide them with support. They don't provide them with support and cream the money, right? Or they go with another company and they make money basically per room. And some of these guys are really unethical. Some of them are really good. Don't get me wrong. There are some really good ones out there, mashallah. Some of them are really unethical, right, in the way that they practice. So some of these guys, right, they're doing this practice on the side, and then they'll come to me and they'll say to me, Altaf, do you know a charity that does only 100% donation policy? I always look at them like really confused. Like, you're cheating the government and people out of support and help and money. Yeah, but here you are telling me about 100% donation policy, like, you got wings on your back. So there's obviously a massive dissonance or whatever you want to call it taking place between these guys. And I think it's the same when it comes to finances. Actually, people don't question things. I think the biggest one is your pension. Generally, people just don't question it. They're just like, you know what? I need a nest egg, bro. I need a nest egg. Or, I eat too much chips and my wife needs a 3 times payout when I die. If you're in certain public sector funds, that's what you get. But you get people like that now. And I think it's just more and more. I remember speaking to one of the brothers that was a senior at one of the charities. And he was trying to convince me that people care. And I was like, bro, you care about Islam a lot. People will say they care about Islam a lot, but not to the same position that you're currently in. And so you have to take that on board, that the MUA, the makeup artist world, and for the guys, the celebs, they exist, and that's the dominant amount of people. That 80%, that's 80% of the community. Us bearded folk here on a podcast at 12 o'clock are probably accounting for less than 10% of the population at the moment. But we're like that practicing folk are probably like 10-20% of the community. There are 80% of them. You know,
You know, it's
we're not
interesting.
reaching.
Maybe we can wrap it up in a bit. But before we do, I think it's interesting how, like, if you kind of like ask an average Muslim, do a survey, ask what would you consider piety to be, right? So you know you come out with the usual, you know, where's the Islamic cultural sort of like attire? Maybe he's got a certain length beard. Maybe, you know, frequents the masjid quite a lot. You see him there. But you know, like Imam Muhammad rahimahullah, one of Imam Abu Hanifa's students, was asked, "How comes you don't write anything on self purification?" So he said, "I have." And they go, "Where?" He goes, "Haven't you read any of my books? They all contain the chapters of buyu, financial dealings." So he's like, he understood the only way you can truly kind of like express your piety inwardly and outwardly is when it comes to dealing with other people and money. Because that's where your greed shows. Your greed is not going to show in putting your forehead on the ground. That's between you and Allah, isn't it? You can be like, you can put an act on in front of Allah. But when it comes to like making those extra few pennies and cutting corners, and it's like, you know, people are going to spot you a mile away. And I think that kind of a thing is something which, I don't know, I mean, what Brother Ibrahim's doing, mashallah, I think that's a fantastic. I mean, he can become a peer, the next peer.
That's it.
You can become the next peer, bro. Yeah, mentor, spiritual mentor. You can have your murids. Yeah, and all of you guys can be daily wird of just checking the finances, stocks.
Ibrahim, other than your website, bro, where else can we direct people? Where should we direct any little traffic that we might get if they want to know more about what you do and the different options available for investment?
The YouTube channel, Islamic Finance Guru, the website, those are probably the best two things. To direct
On LinkedIn as well, bro.
What's that?
LinkedIn might be quite popular among some of the viewers. Sorry.
I'm very much on LinkedIn, spamming away every so often. So you can check me out there. But no, I that, you know, really chimes with me what you said, Mufti Saab, about, you know, the bir aspect. Like, if you think about it, the Quran talks about it all the time, doesn't it? لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. Like, when it talks about bir and taqwa, it's always talking about money. Well, not always, but a lot of the time it's talking about money. And there's this hadith about رحم الله عبدا سمحا إذا باع سمحا إذا اشترى سمحا إذا اقتضى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to the servant who's lenient in his buying and his selling, and when he's falling in the debts. And I hadith like that so powerful, in that, you know, you want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is linking that to your actual transactions. So you get a chance to earn Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy every day whenever you're buying or selling and negotiating.
Subhanallah, Ajib, amazing.
SubhanAllah.
Anyway, Altaf, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, man.
Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Ibrahim, for coming on.
Enjoyed it.
No.
Maybe next time for the trilogy, your book that you were writing, yeah?
Maybe
talk more about that.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. No, Jazakallah khair for coming on. I think it's really, really helpful. I think the three things that you kind of like mentioned and the alternative assets, something I'm going to look at. But I'm definitely, if you ever come across it, Ibrahim, let me know about somebody doing microfinance for those that are in need within this country, because that's something that I would love to do. But yeah, no, Jazakallah khair for coming on. I think it's been definitely something that I'm going to go away and look at, investing my £10 that I made from stakes into into one of these things.
Can I invest into Brother Altaf's the premium stake business?
At this moment in time, we're talking to our financial advisors at the IFG. You know, they might want to add us to their angel syndicate that they've created with our franchise business model around providing stakes across the world. And if you invest, brother, it definitely won't be a mistake. Hey, dad joke. Alhamdulillah, no, Jazakallah khair. Nav as well, Jazakallah khair for being silent for 2 hours. MashaAllah, it's been really difficult for you to achieve something. Alhamdulillah. Let's wrap up, man. Assalamu alaikum, guys.
Wa alaikum salam.
Just to finish it off, we haven't finished yet. Brother Ibrahim has gone. Just around on your thoughts. I mean, I really kind of was interested in what Ibrahim was talking about. You know, I think very, very important for us to really think about our future. So I think what Ibrahim touched upon, the idea that we're selfish in the way we even do chanda. I think that's the prime example of our sort of like concern for our own, even being concerned with your own deeds. Like you're just worried about you getting the reward. Whereas if you kind of look at it from like zakat and all these kind of funds, it's to do with other people, isn't it? It's like providing for other people, giving them opportunities. And Abdul Rahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, the issue when it comes to, you know, the providing the he could have invested the money himself, he could have made his own money, but he brought other people in, you know, he showed them what opportunities that they have. So I think these kind of things are eye openers for a lot of people, because we don't see Islam like that. We kind of see Islam as being a self sort of like contained like thing that you can just kind of do yourself and you know, swim in your own pond until you die, and you don't really have to affect anyone. But if you look at the big timers in Islam, yeah, the early Sahaba, Tabi'in, Tabi Tabi'in, it was like investments that they made. It was for whatever form of investment they made, giving in the path of Allah, you know, helping the people that were in need, zakat or whatever forms. I don't know, what do you guys, before we finish?
I just want to say that Altaf, I was actually speaking today, so you know, I don't know where that came from. I thought that was abusing your authoritative position. Anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah, Mufti Saab, you're right, man. There's a few really emotional lines that normally people drop that didn't get dropped today when it comes to Islamic finance, about the severe reality of riba and stuff like that. That's something that we probably haven't touched upon. I don't know how accurate the transmission is, but I don't know. I read something about Imam Abu Hanifa not walking under a house.
They say that.
Yeah, something about a shade because he didn't want to benefit from interest or something
but
like
on
that.
On the same thing, it's like, interestingly, Imam Abu Hanifa, I mean, we could talk about this, but if we get someone like Mufti Farazam,
yeah,
and I think it'd be very interesting to have like, what was Imam Abu Hanifa's understanding of how the world should see transactions in a Muslim society as transactions in a non-Muslim society. He had different understandings of it.
Wow.
So transactions within even a Muslim society, in a Muslim city, and in a non-Muslim area in a Muslim society. Yeah. So, you know, it's very interesting how Imam Abu Hanifa saw things when it came to business, because he was a businessman, and he was kind of clued up. He understood what the realities of business and trade is, and what the theory is. So yeah, maybe we get Mufti Farazan, and maybe we can just ask him loads of questions.
We need to get Mufti Bilal on. That's what we need.
Both of them. We get both of them.
That show can only start after midnight.
Anyway, should we call it a day, guys?
Jazakallah
khair.
khair.
Jazakallah khair, guys. All your questions. You had a lot of questions, but I think maybe those kind of questions were for another type of podcast, rather than, like, this was more focused on Islamic finance, in how people, if they want to invest in Islamic finance, rather than asking about questions with regards to specific fiqh questions.
If anybody needs any help with what not to invest in, please direct all questions to me. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.